Given that it's the 7th day in a row of 100-degree plus weather around here, I'm skipping the junkyard runs and scanning the internet for some interesting projects. So in the spirit of the Honda CB4 cylinder single overhead cam bikes, I've found 4 different Honda CB project bikes. The Honda CB750 was considered the world's first superbike, and the success of this bike led to the CB500 So let's start with the 1971 CB500, which the seller is asking for $1,500. It looks like he's already started to make it into a cafe racer. According to the description, the engine's been rebuilt or at least refreshed with new seals and gaskets. The rear subframe has been detabbed, and he's installed clubman bars, and let's see, the 4x4 exhaust is still intact, and from my experience, I think it sounds a lot better than the 4x1 exhaust that most cafe racer conversion bikes swap over to. The seller says the only thing that this bike needs is some electrical work. So if I were to buy this project, I'd just go ahead and rewire the entire bike and use a Moto Gadget control unit, an M-Blue unit. No point in trying to reuse the crispy, 40-year-old, 40-plus-year-old wiring now. Speaking of project bikes, the next one, 1976 CB550F Super Sport. And the 550 was an evolution of the 500 engine. So it was bored out, and the 550 transmission is said to be a little bit better than the 500, which was a little bit finicky and maybe quote-unquote fragile. The exhaust is missing from this bike. But the Super Sports came stock with the 4x1 exhaust versus the standard 4x4 that came on the 500s and the 550Ks. So you should be able to find a 4x1 aftermarket exhaust fairly easily. Seller's only asking for $700, and most of the parts seem to be there except for the exhaust and the carbs, which are missing. So again, you can probably find an aftermarket replacement for the exhaust, but the carbs may be a little more challenging to replace. The third bike on my list is a 1996 CB750, and everything looks to be there. The owner claims that it ran when parked about 6 years ago, and given the completeness, it looks like it could be completely restored to its original UJM, or Universal Japanese Motorcycle setup. Seller's asking for $1,000 for this one, which isn't quite a steal. Probably just a pretty fair price, but maybe you can negotiate it down a little bit. But speaking of steals, this next bike is a 1978 CB750, which is listed for the blue light special price of $350. Again, the carbs aren't installed on the bike, so you don't see them in the pictures, but the seller says he does have them, and they're sitting in a box. But the rest of the parts seem to be there. So as long as the motor's not completely stuck, I think this might be the perfect donor bike for a really nice cafe racer setup with a super, super low buy-in price. The CB750 is a bit bigger and about 100 pounds heavier than the 500 or 550. But the 750 has a higher horsepower, 67 horsepower versus the 50. Claimed 50 on the 500s and the 550s. But all 4 of these I like because they're air cooled, so you don't have to mess around with radiators and coolant. Fairly simple to work on, and they just tend to last. I mean, they are Hondas after all. Parts are readily available from a bunch of different internet retailers, and the CBs. I don't have to tell you guys, but the CBs have been really popular donor bikes to be cafe'd or chopped or bobbed or scrambled. So, no matter what flavor you want to end up with, there's plenty of aftermarket support to make these bikes into whatever you want it to be. But because there are so many of them out there, they're not hugely valuable. So investment-wise, with the exception of the really, really early CB750s, which are sometimes referred to as sand cast models, which means that the engine cases were using a sand mold. Some argue that the sand casts aren't quite as strong as the later die cast engines, but for collectability, what you want to look for is those sand cast models, and beware that they make a lot of fakes out there as well. So, but you know, if you're looking for a fun project to work on and just really customize and not worry about collectability, you can't go wrong with any of these. That first bike looks like it's you know 70–80% to the cafe setup, and then the rest of them are just good bases to start from. So anyway, I'll include the links in the descriptions below, and you know, if you're like me and always looking to add another project to the fleet. So anyway, thanks for watching.